So I've been wanting to make a video on debunking Kundalini myths for some time, and to just share some of my direct experience about what it's like, and what to look for, and how to not get sidetracked in things. Well, lo and behold, I came across Christina Lopes' channel, and she's another YouTuber who has quite a following, and she's done a number of videos on spiritual awakening and Kundalini and things like that. And so I thought, as a good way of addressing this topic, it would kind of be to just juxtapose my own understanding and experience with hers in her video, and we can talk about where we converge, and also where we diverge, and just get a greater understanding from there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. By the way, welcome. If we haven't met before, my name is Koharlan, and this is the Mantra Corner, where we discuss non-duality, spiritual awakening, Kundalini, and all sorts of cool things like that. Welcome. If that interests you, please consider subscribing. Click that subscribe button, because I produce a lot of videos like this with, related content. Oh, hey, it's a chipmunk. And you also might want to like this video. If you do, that helps us, spread our reach. So without further ado, though, let's get back to the topic at hand. What we're going to discuss in this video is a number of things concerning Kundalini awakening. What are the myths around Kundalini? What can we look for? I'm just going to go really step by step with some of the things that Christina discussed in her video. And before I even get started there, though, let me go ahead and extend my warmest appreciation for you, Christina. I really love your energy. And from the moment that I watched your video, and I've only seen this one video of yours, I noticed you had quite a bit because I did look at your channel. But this is the only video I've watched of yours. And, right away I was struck that obviously this person is awake. This person has had a Kundalini awakening, one would say, because, you can just recognize it in the light in your eyes. But, there are various levels of awakening, for sure. And, to get an idea of where we fall in the spectrum, just as you were kind of alluding to in your video, a Kundalini awakening isn't a one-time thing and then you're done. It's the onset of the process towards realization and enlightenment. And we might get into some of that later, but I don't want to get off topic. First, let me just talk about one of the first things that you said. You said that Kundalini is intelligent and has a life of its own. Yes, I absolutely concur with that. And we're going to concur on a bunch of, points here, because, one of the things that you talked about a couple of times was how people try to, control their Kundalini, or they want to, awaken it prematurely and things like that. And all of that is coming from a dualistic misunderstanding about what actually Kundalini is. It is awakened Shakti. It is God's own energy, and it is intelligent, and it is powerful. It's more powerful than you can possibly imagine. I mean that very literally. Whatever you can possibly imagine, it's well beyond that. Nonetheless, all right, you also called it an evolutionary biotechnology. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yes, it does spurn the spiritual evolution of the apparent individual. In fact, one of my teachers, my guru, in fact, said it this way, that if a Kundalini, or he said, when Kundalini awakening happens, it is truly the onset of spirituality. Prior to that, it's mostly just ego games. It's about bartering one's, potential future in heaven and things like that. But Kundalini awakening is really about the awakening to truth, to realization about what you are, about what God is, about what reality is, and the nature of things. And it's a teacher. It is a teacher in and of itself, and it is the true guru. So let's go further, though. The way you said it is similar to what we talk about in Sanskrit. These traumas and these ignorances and these problems and things, these impurities, if you will, that it brings to the surface, we know as samskaras. And it's just, impressions that get left in our being, in our spiritual being, in our body even, they manifest. Whenever we're faced with a situation or an experience that, we resist, whenever we are bound up in ourselves, we create these tensions, this tightening, this clinging, this neediness. Sometimes it can, it gets manifest as all sorts of clinging, pushing away, resisting, holding on. It binds us all up. We get all bound up inside, and when Kundalini awakens, it is the process of undoing all of that. So it's the process of undoing the seeking of anything as well. Desire is a clinging energy. So anyone who's wanting to gain something from their Kundalini awakening is completely deluded. You see, the ego would want to use Kundalini or spiritual awakening as a means to aggrandize itself. You see? However, this is a great paradox, because there's no place for the ego in awakening. And actually what you awaken to is the dissolving of the ego. So whatever it is that the ego thinks it's going to gain, it doesn't. It's the undoing of that. It's the undoing of desire and of wanting, because it's ultimately the undoing of separation, the whole separation program. We're going to get to that a little bit more, I think, in a minute. Whoo, I'm starting to feel the energy. Whoo, it's rising. It is rising. It's getting intense. Oh, if you talk about these things, it tends to bring it on powerfully. It can. Nonetheless, you talked about how expanding the siddhis, this can happen. The powers can expand as well. And, these soul's gifts, as you call them. And here's, one thing you mentioned about this creating a difficulty. The only thing that one really has to recognize is that these soul gifts, if you will, right, these powers, if they manifest, they're not yours. So you don't take ownership of them. That's what the ego would want to do. The ego would cling to it, say, this is mine. Oh, look how great I've gotten. Look at what I can do. The problem is you'll eventually lose that power, and when it's taken from you, you will suffer because you'd identified with it. So this is just a danger of, if you want to avoid pain and suffering that's unnecessary, don't cling to anything if it arises like that. Oh, Yahweh, Allah, I am God, I am Baba. Okay, let's continue. So, some of the myths you talked about. Dangers of awakening prematurely. Yes, awakening does happen by itself. You don't do it. So, you can't awaken it prematurely on accident. When it's your time, it's going to happen. Certainly, I like what Ken Wilber says about this. He says about meditation that, for instance, enlightenment or spiritual awakening is an accident, right? It can't be brought about by conscious intention. However, meditation makes you more accident prone. So if you're doing spiritual practice and things like that, yoga, all this sort of things, qigong, any sort of meditative practice, consciousness expansion work or self-inquiry and things, could be helpful. But probably if you're interested in those sort of things, you may have already had an awakening and just didn't realize it. Whew. Oh, man. Oh, it gets intense. It's also a little chilly right now, but I feel warm inside. I don't think it's the cold at all. I feel very warm inside. Yeah, that's the energy. All right, so here is what happens. So when there's a danger associated, it's only because the ego is not ready. Now, the thing is, though, the ego is never going to be ready for Kundalini awakening. It doesn't even know what to make of it. It really has no conception of what it is, and so it might hear about it and think, oh, that sounds great. I want that experience. But again, the problem is it's it's the dissolving of the ego. And this can be very painful and difficult when everything that one was clinging to is being ripped away. But you see, the ego is not real. And so whatever you're losing, you're not really losing anything that's of value or of true worth. You're only losing those bits and pieces of yourself that weren't actual. They were just limiting you from realizing your true self. To cling or not to cling? That is the question. And you see, it's not you that lets go when clinging stops happening. It's just that awareness awakens to the reality that clinging is foolishness. And so it begins to stop. That's what's happening here. It's a lot of what's happening with the energy in this body right now, with the shaking. I feel the clinging of the body, the inherent clinging that's been built up in the system, the habitual clinging, if you will, is being confronted with source, Kundalini, with Shakti, energy. And it's causing it to dissolve. See, it's causing it to dissolve. I'm not doing it. I don't let go. This is a great confusion. You don't need to let go of your ego. The ego needs to be seen through. And then it dissolves. And this can take time and repeated seeing through. But this is a great stumbling point on the spiritual path, is when you think you need to do it. When people think, I need to awaken my Kundalini, or when I raise my Kundalini, this happens. But that's nonsense. You don't raise your Kundalini. Kundalini is more essentially what you are than you. The problem is you are seen as separate from it. Your identity says, I'm separate from it. And this is the process I've been going through, so I know it very, very well. You see, when the Kundalini, when it strongly reacts, right? When it activates in a powerful way and it hits these blocks, it hits these samskaras, it's jolting to the system. It literally creates, it creates a lot of movement. A lot of times, it's a force, a powerful force hitting something. Resistance is happening as it does its work. You see. But this unraveling that's happening of its own accord now is unifying the system. The problem was, as I was alluding to, is that when it happens, it feels like it's happening to me. And it can freak me out, right? It freaks the ego out. What the hell is going on? Where is this energy coming from? What do I do with it? What do I need to do to fix it? How do I control it? How do I stop it? Well, that's the thing. The ego can't. The ego freaks out. It's like a bad trip, when you experience something, that you don't want to see about yourself. Something comes to the surface and you resist it, right? That creates a lot of tension, a lot of suffering. Well, this is just what's happening, except it's bringing, it's bringing to the surface the truth of what you are. And it's got to burn through a bunch of garbage in order for you to see it, to recognize it. And then, as I said before, awareness recognizes that clinging has been happening. And then intelligence begins to undo that all by itself. I hope I can get to everything that I want to discuss. So, again, you don't control Kundalini. Yes, we concur there. Now, when you talked about enlightenment, though, Christina, you said, you keep evolving and you never really get there. And that is a sticking point for us. Because, yes, consciousness continues to awaken more and more, you could say, to itself. But at a certain point, what happens is Recognition of one's own self as wholeness and divinity, and consciousness itself as its essence, not separate from anything or anyone, recognizes itself. And then begins to express itself spontaneously, consciously. And the sense of separation, which was formerly known as the ego, dissolves and drops away. And so this is why the best teachers are always mirrors, because there's no separate self left within them to do anything other than reflect back what's in front. And so that is the process of spiritual, evolvement, you could say, is the polishing of that mirror. But ultimately, when you recognize yourself as that light, which manifests as everything in your direct experience, the game of evolution is over. There's no one left to evolve. And this is when a great, great, deep peace descends. Kundalini is known as the descent of grace, and that's what it roughly translates as. Descent of grace, even though it's felt as an uprising force initially. It's descending from awake awareness, from the Guru, from God. And so, a lot of teachers talk about, I'm not the Guru, and I'm not your Guru, and all this, right? And this can be a problem for, if you're speaking to the ego and you're telling it, if you're speaking to a strong ego and you're telling it you don't need a guru, you could be doing it a disservice, that being, because it's doing a disservice to what the guru is, right? But you're correct in that the true guru is within, and Kundalini Shakti, when awakened, she is the guru. Yes. And ultimately, you must know yourself as that. And that is the union of Shiva Shakti. That is when the whole notion of duality and separation collapses, and wholeness is returned to the system experientially. Ha ha! The journey ends, baby. The suffering ends. So, what about the desire for awakening? This I made as a note because I wanted to touch on that. What about the desire for awakening? That is a major trap. So if someone is if they're seeking spiritual enlightenment that bad that they want to pay a master to awaken their Kundalini, that's all ego game. The thing is, your Kundalini may already be awakened, but you're so caught up in the ego and bound up that you won't stop seeking, and that's desire. It's clinging, it's tension, it's limiting the energy from doing what it wants to do, what it naturally will do if you just get out of the way. But a guru can show you yourself, can recognize all the ego's games, so he doesn't get trapped. So he can show you your own self. And that's the power of the external guru. And if you can have the ability to spend time with one who is awakened, I highly encourage you, any of you watching, to do so. Because there is a gravitational pull that you can get swept up in when you're in the presence of one who is awakened and established in that awareness. It is the Kundalini manifest, right? It's not that individual, it's not that person. I want to make that very, very clear. It's not me. It's not the artist formerly known as Colin, right? It's not what you guys think of when you see this body. It's something beyond that. It's something far greater. It's literally everything. Yahweh, Guru, Allah, I am. Again, my heart is warm. I love you all. Om. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I love you. See you around, people.